Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Hey friends, Mike Brennan here. I'm going to cut to the chase today because we have a little bit of a longer episode. I want to make sure that you hang around to listen to the whole thing. It's a great conversation that I have with my buddy Terry Weaver, who is the founder of the Thing event. And we talk about creativity in a lot of different facets today. The importance of community and authenticity, vulnerability in the creative process. We talk about the intersection of commerce and creativity and the importance of showing up for yourself and for others. Along with this, we also talk about the community that is found at The Thing. And if you're interested in joining us for The Thing in Orlando on November 8th through the 10th of 2024. We would love to have you there. I'm going to be speaking. I'm also going to be live sketching, so you can come and hang out with me, with all my friends, my community there at The Thing. If you are a creative entrepreneur, if you're looking for some community, some people who can come around you to learn and to process this stuff and feel like you're rowing together with people, and not simply just dropping in, getting some information, and then dropping out to go back home and do it all on your own, then come and join us. Go to thethingorlando.com, and if you use the code CREATIVE, you can get 20% off, which is a limited time that Terry talks about at the end of this episode. I highly recommend that you take him up on this offer. You will not be sorry. And this episode is not just a giant commercial, by the way. I know that sometimes when there's things that are being sold or talked about, events and whatnot, that sometimes it can feel that way on other podcasts especially. I try to minimize that. I always want to make sure that there's value for you as the listener and that you can get some practical insights and some thoughts in the conversation that we have. Today, again, it is a little bit different where we're just having a conversation. It's kind of weaving in and out, no pun intended for Terry Weaver, but it's going in and out of different parts of creativity and authenticity and community. And I hope that you feel encouraged and that some of the things we talk about resonate with you. So without further ado, here is my creative chat and a casual conversation with my buddy Terry Weaver. Well, hey, welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. I'm here with my friend Terry Weaver. He's been on the show many times. I think you may actually hold the record, now that we have this recording, as the person who's been on the podcast the most. So,
who's in second place?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and look. There's not many people who have been repeat offenders, so to speak.
Just can't get enough.
Yes. Well, I always love the opportunity to chat with you and to bring you into the community and for the podcast, for Daily Creative Habit, and let people know, like, this is where I go for my community, where I go to have a mastermind group and be a part of some people who are, rowing all in the same direction. And so you're the guy who leads that. And so it's always a privilege to be able to share you with other people.
Aw.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mikey. I always feel like when I'm in the creative chats, like I feel like I should always I feel like I'm underdressed for the creative. I feel like I should have like a velvet sport coat and a pipe, and we should be sitting in leather chairs, somewhere like Ron Burgundy would hang out, where it smells of rich mahogany, and we have chats about the wisdom that comes from our creativity, and
Yeah. I mean, I'm not opposed to it, So
yeah.
if somebody, you have a guy.
If you've got a guy, there's got to be somebody in our community that has some weird cigar lounge in their house. Or I'm trying to think of who that would be that I currently know right now, but someone surely has a. If not, there's a really cool speakeasy that I probably haven't taken to you since now that you're a Nashville resident.
Yes.
We should probably go speakeasy.
Is it the one with the phone booth, the red phone booth
outside? Yeah,
I've seen the red phone booth, and I don't know what the code is. So yes,
I've got the business card of the owner, which I figure is good enough. I'm not like I'm trying to name drop. It's just I went there with somebody else, and it was like, that place is definitely that place. It's like everyone's either smoking a cigar or a pipe, and
Sure.
everything's leather. All of the you'd have to wear your spiffy, your newsboys cap, because everybody's in some like it just feels like everyone's dressed up to like cosplay like Ireland or something when you go to that place.
Okay. I mean, it could be worse,
One of the things I didn't come home with from Europe was a kilt, and so
we're probably all better off for that.
The whole world is safer for it. The big and tall kilt section. I gotta hit that up.
Yeah.
I'd have to just make my mom's quite the sewer, so maybe I'll have my mom make me a custom kilt.
Merry Christmas.
But like since we have a big joke in our community around buffalo plaid, so maybe it should be like buffalo plaid.
Yes. Oh goodness.
Well, man, creativity is one of those things that's interesting. Just even being on here and talking about it, it's like, people always sort of talk about creative people like they're some odd race from like another planet that landed here. Like they're aliens. As Robert Downey Jr. stares at my soul behind your head. Yeah, man, it's one of those things that like there's a lot of like this like mystique around creativity when in reality, for me how creativity like played out today was like, how do I get up and actually accomplish stuff on a day that I kind of just want to quit?
Yeah.
I had to use creativity to navigate through that process. And it's not always like sexy, and it's not always like a whiteboard and like, hey, let's imagine something beautiful. Sometimes it's just applying your creative muscle to powering through the reality of like life and the day and the work that needs to be done. And, you and I are similar in the fact that we tend to get inspiration from changing our scenery and changing our I currently work from a couple of places in my house for that reason. Even in my own house, I try to like mix up where I work from, and so there's work from just to kind of mix up kind of the energy around like what the work that has to be done. And a lot of people talk about like they introduce somebody like, oh, this person's a creative, like you should know them, and it's like I think there's creativity all around us, and I think we underestimate, and we often, have separated ourselves into this weird alien race that, sure, we're weirdos, but that's different from our creative process.
Yeah.
A lot of us are,
there's a big part of creativity because so much of it, it happens in our heads, right? It's something that we are thinking about, we're dwelling on, and perhaps a lot of people go into their cave and to create something. So much of it is usually we're taught so much of it is about being by yourself, cultivating that sense of, think about something, create it, and then invite some other people into the process somewhere along the way. But, I think getting out of that, realizing that we can be our own worst enemies, even when we're facing some problems and everything's all stuck in our heads and we're not inviting anybody else in, whether we're trying to solve a problem or whether it's, hey, I just need community to be around me as I'm creating. So maybe I can bounce ideas off somebody, or they can see what I'm doing and even lend their lenses to what I'm creating. And for a lot of people, I think that's missing, that piece,
Yeah, and dude, I would argue that that's not creativity. That's insanity.
Yeah.
That's how you hear about, people ending it. That's how people end up making really poor, permanent decisions about their life. They end up quitting. They end up, because, I think we've been, that's something we've been taught that, that creativity is something that happens in here. And that there needs to be there's like this prize that we get, for pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps and doing it alone. And I don't know anyone that's genuinely successful that's doing it that way on their own. They might have had I know people that have had, my buddy in the music industry, Tom Jackson, used to call them lottery winners. It's like they had a big hit, they had a big opportunity, they had something came out, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, you won the lottery, congratulations. But very seldom are they able to repeat that. That's why there's so many one-hit wonders.
Sure, it's lightning in a bottle.
Lightning
in a bottle.
Yeah, and I think that, I think we treat creativity like, there was a great commercial, by GE a few years ago, and it was this Muppet that they had created. Actually, had the Jim Henson Studios create this Muppet, and this thing was ugly and gross and dirty and wet and had dirt all over it. And it's we get these ideas, and they're very, we're scared about them. And, and maybe it's actually a flaw on my part. I don't know, but I tend to not want to keep things. The longer it stays alone in me, unless it's something I've got it that's deeply, deeply, deeply personal. Mm-hmm. And, and I think when it becomes too deeply personal, I've been following Rick Rubin's conversations a lot about art and creativity, and and he I think takes it a little too far for me, because he makes it really, really personal, and and unless you've won the lottery, you're typically creating as part of your vocation. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's where creativity goes and finds its friend generosity. Because it's pretty selfish when you share all your brilliance to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a pretty, selfish thing.
It's interesting. You bring up Rick Rubin, and I heard him on a podcast with, actually, I think it was Ted Danson and Woody Harrelson. They have a podcast,
well, that's a podcast right there,
which is pretty great. And I also heard the similar theme from the Smartless guys on their podcast, and one other source I don't remember at the moment. But this theme kept coming up of this sense of, don't position so much, don't try so hard, relax, basically. If you learn to create and relax, you're actually being more of you, and maybe it's a little more personable and personal, but there's a sense of, they said, that's when you get to the good stuff. That's when you get to a level at which you're not trying to posture anymore, and you're not trying to convince anybody of your abilities or your ideas or any of these things, and I think when you're comfortable with yourself and with your ideas and going you're open-handed, yeah, sure, maybe there's some bad ideas that need to be sifted out. But sure, even in the process of that, you're relaxed. You're not clinging to stuff so tightly because you're thinking, if somebody shoots this down, it means that I'm not good as a creative, or I'm not worthy of the work or anything. It's an interesting idea that, like I said, has come up a bunch of different times, and I'm certainly paying attention to that right now.
Yeah, I think there's this natural tightrope that we have to walk between confidence and authenticity, which is probably in the middle, and I'm probably on the other side. Is there's this word that we use for ourselves a lot, which is humble and humility. And when you basically, if you look at the dictionary definition of humility, it's to think ill of yourself and to press yourself down. It's I don't know that I want to do that. And I think there's a certain level. I mean, even in the things that you and I have been a privilege to work together on and stuff, it's at some point you kind of have to take sure, it's deeply personal, but you sort of have to remove yourself from it a little bit, or you can really get your feelings hurt. And it's a delicate balance, dude, because I don't do any work that I don't deeply care about. Mm-hmm. I just don't.
Well, and sometimes there's work that you do that's just for you, and that's okay. And I think that's actually needed. I think it's a yes and. It's not either or. Sometimes you create something and it's like, I'm not necessarily going to put this out there for everybody to critique or to, shoot holes in or whatever. And the act of creating it was what I needed in this moment. It wasn't even the
I
final
consider
product
myself to be very creative and even an authority on creativity, but I'm not necessarily artistic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a fine artist, although I've worked with a lot of fun, I've worked in that area and I can create, visual design kind of stuff. I enjoy that work a little bit, not much, but a little bit, and I write and I enjoy. It's interesting because I've watched you lately pick up photography a lot more.
Yeah.
And it's interesting of how we start to go adjacent to what we are already doing.
Mm-hmm.
And people ask me about hobbies, like, what's your hobby? And my hobby is probably very tied close to like what I do professionally. And this is a phrase that's not mine, but it's an Andy Andrews, who's one of my favorite authors, who's been on my podcast several times. If not one of the people that's been on the podcast, I think he's been on my podcast 3 times now, at least twice. But Andy calls himself a noticer.
Mm.
And you mentioned some comedians. Comedians are very much noticers. All of comedy is just noticing things that are obvious to everyone, but maybe other people haven't found the nuance of what makes that funny.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the most creative people, interestingly, that you mentioned slowing down, the most creative people are the people that have slowed down enough to notice. They have looked around. They have looked up.
Yeah.
They have looked down. They haven't just, I'm all about, one of the most famous Walt Disney quotes is, around here we keep moving forward. But that doesn't mean we don't look around while we're going in a forward direction. And I think that having the right people around you allows you to not miss some of the things that maybe you would have missed along the way. And it's people to kind of grab you by the shoulder and say, hey man, you may want to look over here. Cause I think your opportunity for amazing it's right over there.
Yeah. And that's where it goes back to, being able to borrow other people's lenses. Because we all have these blind spots. We all have these biases built in. And when we get around other people, it's helpful because they can start showing us things that, like you said, maybe right around us that we weren't even aware of, or possibilities that we're like, oh, I didn't even consider that as a solution or a creative endeavor. And getting exposure to that can be key to maybe unlocking something that either becomes part of our process or maybe a whole new, creative endeavor that could lead us places that we never actually thought we would ever go,
Yeah, and I think there's that. It's kind of like when you go somewhere and then you go somewhere with people. Obviously, if anybody's seen the video to this, they're seeing Mickey Mouse stuff behind my head, and I love taking people. In particular, I love taking people to Disneyland because I love helping them see what they might be missing. I love to take them to Walt's bench where, the original bench where or one of the benches from Griffith Park where he sat down and had that idea to with the girls on a Saturday at the carousel and said, hey, maybe there could be more. And I loved to show them my lens. And a lot of it's always fun because people like, oh, it's just a place with no, I actually think Disneyland is the world's largest art exhibit. Because it's, creativity, it's artisans that have created spaces that we can go and immerse ourselves. And that word immerse is really interesting when it comes to, especially when it talks about what we do with the thing. It's because I want to immerse people in spaces that kind of force them to leave where they currently reside.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, you before coming around the thing, I mean, I had been to Disney World several times, but not to the level and degree
Yeah.
since being around the thing and around you specifically. And the thing that I love about it is every time, even though you're going the same place, and of course, there's things that they update and new attractions and whatnot, but there's typically something that I'm finding for the first time or seeing in a different light, or you're exposing us to things of going like, this is something that is not obvious for people just strolling through the park or, trying to cram in as much as possible. Right. And I love that because it's a little bit of like the inside track on some things that typically exposes us to, a nuanced thing, but it's really special. And those are awesome moments to share together,
Dude, I loved one of my favorite moments and memories that I've talked about is taking you to Batu or Galaxy Springs at Hollywood Studios for the first time.
Oh yeah.
And I intentionally said, "Hey, dude, I'm going to take you a certain way." Because there's one way you go, you kind of come up like and you're looking over top of the Falcon and it's just kind of there and whatever. But there's a certain way you round a corner and there she is, the hunk of junk. And I still remember looking at you you were looking at the Falcon and I was looking at you and, you had tears forming in your eyes because you eventually were brought to that place where you were on the floor, at home with probably your whatever toys you had, imagining seeing that place in real. Like, it's like the joke from, the guy that's the wrestling guy that's like, it's real to me, dang it. The Star Wars like galaxy to us who were born around the same time that Mike and I are close in age. He is older than I am, just for the record. But like you were immediately taken back to that place of you probably like crawling on the floor playing with your Kenner Star Wars toys and whatever you had or
I had a friend who actually had the Millennium Falcon also. That was pretty cool growing up and being able to play alongside him and do all the Star Wars adventures. So yeah.
Right, and like what's interesting specifically about the Star Wars stuff for me is like the creativity that Lucas did creating that space is he created home for a lot of us. In the weirdest way. That's just such a nerdy, weird conversation. But what he created, because when you're able to go to that place, and dude, when I go to the parks alone, or with our buddy, like our buddy and I were there together, I kind of find myself just wanting to camp out there sometimes, and particularly in Galaxy's Edge, because I want to hang out, and it just weirdly takes me to another place. Just because when all you can see is another galaxy and then a bunch of sweaty Floridians, if you can kind of get yourself outside of that a little bit and allow yourself. And I think that's really what the secret to creativity is. It's allowing yourself to remove yourself from like, hey, just for a minute, let's stop being so dang serious about life and everything. And let's just stop and notice what's all around us and the wonder of what somebody else created. And, in that case, I spent years and years and almost a decade creating that space. And I love, I go out and buy there's a book called The Art of Galaxy's Edge that has all of the, all of the stuff that they didn't create. And yes, all the things you really wanted to happen are in the book. It's a little depressing. And I think that's sort of the rough part of creativity is like the creative people did amazing things that that we've not yet seen. That doesn't mean we won't see. But we've not seen yet. And, that's sometimes the hard part about creative. And I think that's where when you're an entrepreneur, when you're creating your own stuff, that's your responsibility to make sure it's seen.
Yeah.
I think
I had part of that conversation I had last night with a group of people, and it was part of the Daily Creative Habit membership, and it came up. So many people are being very prolific with the work, and I was like, and this I'm speaking from experience here too, right? So it's being prolific, yes, but also then how is that actually going to have a road to get out to people? How are people going to interact with what it is that you created? And that's something that I think a lot of creative people, especially artists, are going, I don't really want to think about that. If we term that marketing or whatever you want to hang on that, they say, well, I just want to create what I create and then not think about the other piece. But to your point, it's making an inroad. It's creating a space for somebody to be able to interact with what it is that you've created so that they can get lost in that, so that they can experience it to a new level. And that's a very important piece that a lot of times people want to opt out from, unfortunately,
Yeah, the thing that's coming to mind right now is this weird sentence that's gonna, and someone might hear this and they may disagree with me, and it's okay. I'll let them be wrong.
They can send you letters, not me.
But I think we can create greatness alone. I think we can create great things alone, but I don't think we can actually be great alone. And part of the creative process, man, is being really unselfish with what you create. Because as soon as it leaves your hands and someone else, consumes it, possesses it, interacts with it, it's no longer yours. It's a shared experience, whether it's art or a book. There's a quote from Erwin McManus this week that I'm wrestling with in a good way, that no one cares about your story until they see themselves in it.
Yeah.
And, I think that's what the creators do. They give us space for other people to find themselves in the things and the places that we find, and the things that we find interesting. As you've begun to explore Nashville, it's been fun to see the city through your lens and the things that you have noticed. And it's been fun to watch what places you would go that I'm like, it's not really my thing. And also places you've been like, hey, dude, watch your back when you're in that neighborhood. That's not a great place. That's not a good after dark neighborhood. Remember that.
Yeah. Maybe there's a little too much New York still left in me.
Yeah. You were in an area of Nashville called Printer's Alley, and dude, like 10 years ago, you wouldn't go in Printer's Alley. Period. And now it's like the hipsters have taken over. They've scraped the dirt off the buildings, and But yeah, man, it's the things we create. Yes, they can be for ourselves, but also there's that moment when we begin to say, I don't want to just create great things. I want to actually achieve greatness. I actually want to achieve success with this. I want to, because the intersection of creativity and commerce is always where things start to get weird. Because we eventually, most of us don't have the luxury. And if you have a job right now that pays you really well, you have this amazing luxury that you don't have. Your creativity is for fun. But for the good number of us on listening to this right now, whether we are employed for our creative services or we are, using our creative services to build things for, our life and revenue, that it starts to be, it starts to feel a little different.
Yeah.
And you almost start, in some ways, you start to, I don't know, maybe have this like negative energy towards like your creative work, because it feels like sometimes
you can shackle the expectation of and the pressures of money to something that you loved, and then fall out of love with it because all of a sudden it's no longer bringing you joy. It now has to be something other than where it started from. And, a lot of times I talk about it like this. I say, it's like having a favorite restaurant, and you're like, I can't wait to go to this favorite restaurant. I go all the time. Like, I know the people there. It's awesome. And so you think, what's better than going to my favorite restaurant? I know, I'll work there. And then you go get a job there. And then all of a sudden you're on the other side of the counter, and now you're in the kitchen, and you're seeing all the things that are happening behind the scenes, and you're like, oh no, like this is horrible. And the thing is, you can't unsee or unknow those things to become a customer again, because you've already had your experience altered. And so I think that happens to a lot of creative people, where they think, well, what's better than me being able to just create whatever I want? Well, if I just made this into part of my career, or for a side hustle or whatever it was, attach some kind of monetary expectation to it, that would be amazing, because then I can do more and more and more of it. And we can strip the life out of something that we once were in love with, and it no longer has joy. And then it becomes about, what can I make that sells? What can I make that, just can make me a more, quote, successful artist or creative person? And I think that's where it's a dangerous place to be, because then we're not in love with the thing anymore. We're not feeling joy. And I think that affects the work itself as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we have these desires to do, we always have this like image we've made up in our head, like we've created, if you will, this desired future that often doesn't work out quite, and then you find yourself almost bitter with what you've created sometimes. I always tell people who want to get into doing this, I'm like, really ask yourself a question: is this really, do you really want to make this your thing, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the things that we've seen and experienced inform our future, right? Like, I was just thinking about, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, you were saying favorite restaurants, and I was thinking, man, like, I'm about to have a birthday. We're recording this on the eve of your birthday, and I'm a year away from one of those ending in zero birthdays. And we've celebrated those. We've celebrated yours here. And, and I think about, like, when I was 20, like the restaurants that I thought were amazing, where I would want to go for my birthday dinner when I was 20, and I probably would have listed things like Red Lobster, Olive Garden, TGI Fridays. What?
Jack in the Box.
No, never Jack in the Box. Chili's, right? Can we go have ice cream at Friendly's? And if we're kind of from the same. I'm from a little further south, but we're kind of from that part of the country where you had Friendly's back in the day.
Oh yeah, yep.
In fact, there's one in Orlando, and I feel like some of us should get together and go have one of those big giant, But those were the places, and now I wouldn't imagine going there on a random Tuesday. I don't even know where the nearest TGI Fridays is. It's probably at the airport or somewhere, And those places have all kind of gone. Interestingly enough, those places have all gone away because of obviously the whole world has seen and experienced new things. But those places kind of hunkered down on being less creative than they were originally. I actually write about Olive Garden in my book because when Olive Garden first, I grew up in D.C., the D.C. area, the Washington, D.C. area. And if you have an Olive Garden that has like a counter at the beginning, one of the original Olive Gardens, you would walk into Olive Garden and you would see them making the noodles in-house. Which, when you think about Olive Garden, most of us think about it's like a half a step above Fazoli's. And if you get Fazoli's on a good day, it might even be better, right? And that's, obviously you're from New York area, so that's garbage, right? Like, you get kicked out of people don't let you come to family events when you admit that you've eaten there.
Well, there's a guilty pleasure that I have every once in a while that I like going to Olive Garden. I'll admit it, even as my Italian self.
Dude, I'll admit it, dude. To go and have soup, salad, and breadsticks this time of year is just oddly sort of And I imagine now that you and I live 5 minutes apart, I imagine we will probably find ourselves hitting up, a bowl of fajoule or whatever. Like, there's not a lot of great places that do salad and soup for like less than $10. So, but you're going there because it's also because that sort of like calls back to like this sense, just like the Falcon did, right? Like to this sense of nostalgia. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's that way because they kind of stopped caring at the level that they cared when they were this newer organization. In fact, there's a restaurant I love called Chuy's. It's a Mexican food restaurant, and I just heard that the company that owns Olive Garden bought them, and it's like, oh man, there goes the energy and the creativity and the and I think we're starting to see, what you talk about, you and I have had a lot of fun AI conversations. But I think as we see with the rise of artificial intelligence and generative AI models and art that today in the news there's a picture of a presidential candidate walking through the streets of the flooding that happened, and it's like, well, he's got 9 fingers. Congratulations, guys. If you couldn't figure out that was fake, you're a moron. But as these things become more, it becomes harder to distinguish what humans are making. Human connection is going to become a much more expensive commodity. Mm-hmm. I discovered a podcast of, where you can basically upload a PD. When you and I were talking about it when you were over for dinner this weekend, and just like that makes me want to. The thought of listening to two, generative AI models talk to each other on a podcast makes me want to slam my head in the front door of my house.
Yeah. Well, because at a certain point, we're oversaturated with content and information.
Yeah.
Like that's not a problem anymore. Nobody's lacking information.
We're not doing this for content.
No.
We're not doing this for information. We're having a conversation and we're inviting people in it. And that's much different than just trying to essentially fill up the swimming pool of content on the internet. It's overflowing.
Yeah.
And I hope people walk away from listening to us yammer at each other that it's just it's a genuine conversation. It's things that, maybe a little more organized and a little more around a big idea. But, for the most part, it's, I'm a late in the day coffee drinker. So I'm sitting here having my coffee with my buddy Mike, and so it's just in our offices, not at the Fainting Goat or, somewhere else in town. So
now I need some sponsorship from Fainting Goat. We mentioned them.
Yes. Nice.
Yeah. And one of the things that, talking about kind of this authenticity piece and this piece of, it's not all about information and content. That's one of the things I think that, we were before cell phones and before the internet, as old as that sounds. But there was
back in my day, you young whippersnappers.
Yeah. But there was a sense of you had to sit around with people. You had to relate. You fostered a sense of community in person in a way that happened a little organically, right? And
back in my day, we had number 2 pencils. We had to.
But yeah, this idea though of like cultivating a place where people can come in and actually be known and be a part of something, not simply just attend something, not simply just check a box that, I got some information, and even like now talking about the thing, right? The thing event. It's not about just going and sitting in that room and filling up a notebook full of notes and things that probably you're not going to leave there and ever look at again anyway. It's really more about being in the room with the people in interacting. And yes, you're going to get ideas, and yes, you're going to get inspiration, and you're going to get some knowledge and skill set stuff that's going to move the needle. But you're also going to be around people who aren't there simply just to check boxes. You've had the ability, Terry, and it's been great to be a part of this and a recipient of this, to build a sense of community. And that's something that people always say about you and about the thing, that the community is strong. And allowing people the opportunity to go, hey, come be a part of this. Like, that's a special thing, you know?
You know, it's interesting because there's that phrase, you and I both grew up in the like our first jobs were in the church world. You know, there's the Bible verse that says where iron sharpens iron.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting when you think about that phrase in the context of what we do with the thing, right? That, you know, when metal hits metal, like sparks fly.
Mm.
You know, if you've ever been around a metal grinder, you know, some of my favorite art is art that's done on metal with grinders and, you know, airbrush and, you know, all kinds of stuff. And I love just watching what happens when sparks are flying. And I feel like that's what I've really tried really hard to create with the thing, is a place where we're pushing people kind of against each other and sparks are flying. And if you're coming to catch that, you know, hopefully you've caught a spark of something from something you heard or a talk. And hopefully you've found the people around the room that help you turn that spark into flames.
Mm-hmm.
And I try really, really hard to create that space. And I also try to keep the people out of the room that show up like a water hose.
Yeah.
That douse that environment. And, you know, it's not easy. You know, just like any other, it's definitely creative work because it's always thinking. It's always asking, how can we plus it? How can we make it better?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things, too, that I know you've shared with me that's going to be a little different this year is some of the things that are happening around the tables, right? Kind of these open space type ideas. And I'm excited about that, too, because that, I think, adds another dimension to things where it's not simply just sit and listen as one component and then also mingle and, you know, walk the hallways and whatnot with other folks and giving it part of the programming, if you will, but that still allows for that kind of interaction and not in a way that's like forced and like, you know, everybody share your favorite color and, you know, and people roll their eyes and are like, oh boy, you know, what time is it? I got to check out of here.
You know, I'm honestly trying, you know, you mentioned, you know, what's going to be different.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really different about events is 5 years ago, everybody bought early bird tickets and then events would sell out.
Mm.
You know, that's just how, for the most part, people bought events. You knew who was coming months in advance. I mean, I get ads served all the time because obviously it's what I do. But the data is that more people are buying events in the 2 weeks before the event than they are the entirety of the time of the entire event. And if you're an event planner, and I'm watching it happen with major artists too, because we're in Nashville. You and I've already got you hooked on the concert scene here because there's live music almost every night of the week, right? Because it's a touring city. People want to be here. Artists like playing here because you go to a concert here, people sing along, people interact. They've been there, done that, and so, you know, every little pocket of our community is doing arts and plays and, you know, all of these things, and so there's this space. But a lot of these things used to sell out, you know, months in advance, and obviously that's the case with like the hottest and latest and greatest, you know, like, oh my gosh, so-and-so's coming here. You know, Taylor Swift sold out 3 nights here in 30 seconds or whatever. But that's not the reality for most people. Most people are like, you know, it's Tuesday afternoon, they're looking, oh, so-and-so's here, let's go see them. And so that's obviously shifting. And even just like this, you talk about some of the more creative things we're trying to create and do, is I'm also sort of trying to hold that a little loosely too. Based on how the next 3 or 4 weeks play out. You know, we're 5 weeks out from the event right now, I think. And so there's some unknown. And the unknown is someone that's trying to plan an event and, you know, is a bit scary, you know. but also, knowing that like, man, how can we? Because coming out of the pandemic, I quickly realized that people are dying. That was a season for you where life was pretty hard, man, and you needed. I saw during the pandemic of how important the lifeline of this event was for people. And it specifically has been that for the people that have said, I'm going to lean in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, there's people who have come and said, I'm coming to show up and get what I can and leave. And it's not been a very meaningful event for them. So if that's you, if you're looking for an event to just get some information, if you want to harvest the room and get some business cards and sell to people or whatever, this probably isn't your event. We'd love to have you and hopefully maybe change your mind about that kind of environment once we get here. But, like, if you want to develop rich relationships and, like, I mean, Mike's an example of, like, what happens when people get in relationship. Like, I mean, obviously you didn't start coming to Nashville just because of the thing, but you obviously started coming more and more frequently and started staying at my house. And, like, we've almost had to rename our guest room the Mike Brennan Suite, like. And so, like, you kind of get to the point where you realize that, like, people are longing for genuine connection. They're longing for a place where they can show up and maybe even, like, me on days like today where it's like, man, it feels like I'm at the end of the rope. I feel like I'm out of inspiration. Like, I feel like I'm out of what to do next. And my hope is that you would come, to the thing, and that would be your place. I mean, literally, we're gathering a couple of days after Election Day. And the world feels, I tried to watch baseball today because I actually like sports. I'd Mike. And, like, the news comes on and, it's like the pictures that we saw as 90s of missiles flying. And it's like, oh, here we go again. Like, we all kind of want to, like, put ourselves away and imagine that's not happening. But the world is mad, and the creators and the storytellers and the people with something to say that has the potential to help and serve people, they've got to gather and they've got to get equipped. And that's why I'm too stubborn to quit.
Yeah.
And, I've never tried to make the thing be about Terry Weaver. And that's probably a bad business move. I get told that from coaches and stuff from time to time that, I really want it to be, I really don't want it to be my event. I want it to be collective. And Mike is one of the people that I've definitely handed some stewardship of the event over to and said, hey, man, I want you to play a bigger role. I want you to play a bigger part. And obviously when you start, I even sat out one of our mastermind calls a couple weeks ago so you could, ask the community what they wanted. It's like, if it was up to us, because we all know each other so well, we would just sit around and hang out with each other. And we specifically do events like that. We went to the mastermind in the mountains, and I'm currently looking for a spot for the the spring next year for us to go and do that kind of stuff together, because I think people really enjoy those intentional times of, like, let's kind of back off the talking heads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just get proximity to each other.
Yeah.
And let some of the magic happen that happens only when you're in proximity with other people.
Yeah, let's just have an event that's just the margins. But although the masses don't want to come to that event, it's hard to coming to an event requires an investment. It has an investment of time and, like, buying tickets and travel, and I get it. But man, I mean, as you look at kind of the culture out there, and if you're like a creative and you're not getting plugged into community, the real question is when you're gonna when are you gonna quit? It's not a matter of if you're gonna quit, because you're gonna run out of gas, you're gonna run out of fuel if you're not If I didn't have this community and if I didn't have other people doing this with me, I would have given up a long time ago.
Yeah.
And
It gets heavy. And
yeah.
when you have something that is a vision that you're desperately trying to see become more and more of a reality, and the more that you push into it, the more obstacles come and the more pressures come. And that is not something that we were meant to do by ourselves.
No. No. And, I mean, we can talk about from a business perspective about but it's your event, it's your thing, Terry. But it really isn't. It's, I'm just the one that's stewarding it. I'm just the one that I was given the idea. I took the risk. I took the start. And I wish there was, I wish there was a magic wand. Everybody says they have the magic wands of, oh yeah, you just need this sales funnel. And it's we're running ads right now and looking at that. And that always feels like voodoo to me too. It's I picked a few people and I punched some buttons and picked some cities and, my favorite is I was creating ads for the thing today. It has Michael Hyatt, and I don't know if your audience knows who Michael Hyatt is, but he used to be the president, CEO of Thomas Nelson. He wrote a book called Platform. He's kind of a lot of the reason why a lot of this industry exists is Michael Hyatt. But Facebook thought he was an actor, which maybe there's a little irony in that, but that's a different conversation. But I think there may be some pressure as we are creating things that we feel like we have to step up and do a little dance. In the music industry, we always call them dog and pony shows. That you had to go put on this, and literally it's funny because we're recording this on the night that was my previous job, was working in the Christian music industry, and this is Dove Award nights when everybody gives out the bird. And it's funny because we used to always do a party during Gospel Music Week, called the Dog and Pony Show. And it was a showcase where everybody just shared their music, and we just admitted that that's what it was, and everybody knew it, and people loved it because we were just admitting what everybody else was trying to hide up as something else. And I think that's sort of what we've tried to, even with the name, The Thing. It's everyone has a thing. You have this idea, this passion, this talent that you want to take to the world. And I know, and maybe you don't know yet, that you need help to do it. Mm-hmm. And the beautiful thing about The Thing is we have people that have been doing this for decades that are coming and sitting in the room with us. And we have people that just had an idea. I talked to somebody today that's just starting. They're ready. They're ready to go. They're, I didn't have a whole lot of details, but they were probably getting an opportunity provided to them by somebody else to need another way to generate revenue in their life. And it's interesting because when you start, and this from starting a community, and people are always waiting for the perfect time. Mm-hmm. And the perfect time ain't coming. The perfect time is now. The perfect time, that Japanese proverb. I actually sent an email to email list about the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. And, when you think about that if you follow the ads from all the gurus on Facebook and the things that people are talking about, where we've all been led to believe that if we do these actions in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, we're going to be gajillionaires and our people are going to be buying our books and our art and our music. And that's just not how life works. Mm-hmm. Most of us are reaping the results of what we were doing 12, 18, 24 months ago. Yeah. The actions that we're taking were taken then. And that's where sustained momentum is the hardest thing to get and continue. And that's also a difficult part because right now as I'm trying to get through, slog through, the hardest part of the event, which is the month before, especially in this climate, when the whole world's focused on a presidential campaign between bad choice A and bad choice B, and we're all focused on all of that stuff, and I'm trying to focus people on, hey, the world needs your thing. We need the gift and the talent that you have, and there's all this distraction. And I'm trying to say, amidst all the distraction, what if you did your thing? Mm-hmm. And it's hard to not. If you're doing it alone, you're going to give up. You're going to quit. And but at the same time, I'm also thinking of okay, 2025. What's next? What's fresh? What do we need to do to invest in do the things now that 12 months from now things will be different?
Yeah.
And
well, even that point of, if we want to use the word evolution, right? The change that happens with ourselves, with what's happening in the world and industries and all that. It's important to be around other people who understand that context, and especially for being an entrepreneur and a creative person, where you're not handed something from somebody and said, here's your role, here's your pathway, here's everything, just show up and do the work. It's so much more involved than that. And there are parts of the journey that you don't anticipate. And so to be able to be around people who are either A, experiencing that, or B, have experienced that and can lend a little insight, it can help normalize some of the pathway that you take as a creative person and as an entrepreneur. Because most people don't understand. Most people don't get what it's like to live in that space day in and day out. And so when you find people to surround yourself with like that, it is tremendously valuable, because it can make the difference, like you said, between giving up or, hey, I'm going to continue to lean into this and continue to evolve and become who I need to be for the next season of whatever's coming,
Yeah, dude, I mean, even just to be super transparent with the things that you've gone through. I felt like there were times where in this process of your journey the last few years, we've had to I felt like the kid on Sesame Street with a shovel, picking you up off the street, let's put Mike back together again. Which is funny because we read a kid's book, and one of the kids' books that we read during the thing 2020 during the pandemic was that what if someone that wrote a book about what if Humpty Dumpty actually did put himself back together again. And I think that's sometimes the process we go through as humans, as life hits us and things happen, that we have to learn how to show up a new version of ourselves, and maybe one that's a little more broken. Mm-hmm. And the illustrations of the book were all basically a duct taped and tape and Band-Aids and missing pieces and new pieces. And I think that. I think about all the people that don't have community, that don't have people around them that are helping pick them up through that process. It's your show, but I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
What do you think someone who's never been to the thing, or for that matter, never really invested in going to a conference, what do you think that they need to hear about the thing from you, for someone who's been, I mean, dude, you've been to almost everything we've done. Mm-hmm. First as an attendee, and then second as somebody that sketched, and third as a speaker. You kind of came and sat in the back of the room and were like, "Do you mind if I sketch while I'm here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, man, whatever." Yeah, man, I'd love to hear your perspective, and I'd love for your audience to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, when you encounter something that's new, there's always the question of what is this going to look like? Is this going to be worth my investment? like you said earlier, there's a lot of things that go into this between flights and hotels and all that. You want to make sure that it's going to be worth it, and I say that in quotes, right? Like worth it. Like what does worth it mean to you? And I had been to, trade shows and more industry specific things for even design where there's a lot of panels of people talking about what trends are happening and what tools to use. And, there's chance to interact with vendors who have certain products and things. And so a large part of my framework going in was thinking about those kind of things, or the other side of things where, we mentioned earlier about ministry as a context in the background. I had been to many ministry type things too, which was completely different from that. And so I wasn't really sure, but I knew that there were enough people in the room who I thought, I think I need to be around them. And I may not be 100% sure why, but there's a sense of these are my people. I think they're going to understand me and understand what I do, even though what they do may be different than what I do. There's still enough similarities where we can compare notes and we can have some conversations, real conversations around some things. And of course, I didn't know until I got in the room. And you start to build some relationships and be a part of the actual community, not just simply drop in and attend something. But the more that you're willing to take a chance to be real with somebody who's there and share, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm coming in the door and I'm broken and bleeding. And I'm not going to bleed all over everybody there, but I'm certainly not going to pretend like everything's great. There have been people who've come through the doors where it's been, hey, I just lost my job and I'm not really sure what comes next. Or I've had some other life upheaval that's happening and I'm not going to pretend like I'm the rock star coming in the room and again, posturing myself. But I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable at least a little bit to say, hey, here's where I'm at. And I'm here open, just looking to see what I can figure out in my time here. The relationship.
And I think that's one of the things, man, that really hurts people from achieving what they want out of life in general is this sense of like posturing.
Yes.
And if there's anything I'm the proudest about the thing, it's the fact that it's a space where I think you can come and be real.
Absolutely.
And it's a place where you can come as you are. And I know that sounds very, very Billy Graham. And in fact, our buddy Craig Fraser is painting a few of my favorite heroes behind me, and Billy's one of them. But there's that sense of like, and I know that's a thing that people say about church and about a lot of places, and it's not true. But I'm really proud to say that I really believe that it is. And I think the more that we learn to show up online as we are, and the more that we learn that it's okay to not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying to come and like bleed all over everybody. Like,
right.
I didn't start my day with like, wanting to, if I'd have posted like, if I'd have answered Facebook's honest question is like, tell me what's on your mind. It's like, really, I always look at that line and go, I don't think you want to know, Mark Zuckerberg, what's on my mind, buddy. But I do think that a lot of times our posturing is standing in the way of the people that need us finding what we have.
Yes.
And
it's also, it blocks us from accessing things, not just information, but the people, the relationships, like you said. Because if, someone comes in and says, hey, you know what? I've been trying this thing and how I've been going about this is just really not working. I'm not seeing the results. Something's misaligned. I'm not really sure what that is. To be able to get in a room where you're hearing people speak from the stage and they're giving you some information that's helpful, but then also you're relating to the people around you and somebody else may, again, have gone through the same thing, or at least being willing enough to say, hey, this is what's not working right now. This is where I need some help. And I think that's key because people who aren't necessarily willing to say that they need help, well, they're not going to find it because no one's going to know that about somebody coming in the room. And if somebody doesn't ask, they don't receive, right? And so this is an opportunity for people to get in a room where some things can happen and be a catalyst, so that when they leave, they're actually leaving with some direction. They're leaving with some relationships. They're leaving with a network of people that can help as they reassimilate into their normal surroundings, and then get to work, get some action going, instead of just drop in and drop out, which is a lot of other events and things, especially bigger ones where you kind of get lost, honestly.
Yeah, and I think of that first thing event that you came to, and I think about the number of speakers, and that was really before anyone. That was at that event. No one that had been. It was only the second one. It was really the first one I did alone, without a business partner, and so there was nobody that had been a speaker that became, there was an attendee, and you were there, and I would say at least 4 of the speakers that year were going through very similar things than you were going through. They were struggling in different ways. I think of our buddy Justin, who shared, he showed up at that event not knowing how he was going to be able to get home, basically. Yeah. And dude, his life has changed since then. It's not, and it's not because I don't think that the thing has. I'm not trying to put some claim that that's going to happen to you, because it's not. But what he did is he came and he decided that his life was going to change and it was going to be different. And maybe, just maybe, that the environment that we created at the thing allowed him a place to see that was possible. Mm-hmm. If there was anything that was on a billboard that we try to make sure that happens at the thing, is it's these are just average people who took remarkable action. And then we could create a hall of fame of people that have done that, both as speakers and attendees, that took remarkable action, and it connected. It worked.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's going to happen for everybody, but I know that eventually, at some point, if you keep showing up and you keep being real and you keep being who you are, you honestly can look back, when you start, because I kind of start to look back through these, an old person sitting on their porch talking about, the good old days. But I can look back and see the trends of wow, every one of the people that actually has broken through and changed and made something happen were the ones that admitted they were broken, the ones that showed up dirty and funky, and they weren't fancy, and they, there was nothing sexy about what they were doing. They did it. Mm-hmm. And when it didn't connect, they got up the next day and did it again until it did.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of it. That you've got to be audacious enough and tenacious enough to not quit. And I think part of not quitting is being around people who won't let you.
For sure. Yeah.
People who won't let you give up on yourself.
Yeah.
And who, when you're not being even honest with yourself, that say, I don't know.
Yeah. They'll ask you the hard questions if you're in proximity like that. And they'll know if you're not showing up, because you usually show up. And so for someone to call you out and go, hey, is everything okay? What's happening? Or where can I help? I think that's a tremendous thing.
Yeah, it's funny, because if I post a post any day and I mention something that seems a little off, 9 or 10 of you will call and be like, hey, who's that about? What's that about? I didn't do anything. It's like that old, You're So Vain song. I bet you think this song is about you. It's no. And then, of course, there's the people who know that it's about them that go slide into your DMs. I'm like, oh, man, I'm sorry. That was kind of a punk move, wasn't it? And, this is hard work that we do, man. Just showing up and saying, I've made something, I've created something, I'm doing work that I want you to know about. I'm doing work to help you, and hey, look at me. And sometimes we end up doing that alone, and sometimes people don't see us. And then sometimes we have to show up the next day, and then eventually somebody sees. Mm-hmm. And, eventually, somehow it all just tends to work out, and, you know, and it may not have been on the timetable that you intended.
Yeah, probably not.
But it probably ends up turning out more beautiful than you could have imagined.
Yeah.
And so I'll probably have to listen to this part of the podcast back a couple times over the next 5 weeks, just because there's a roller coaster. I've been talking with several of you lately about just the fact that in entrepreneurship, there are really high highs and there are really low lows. And often they come in rapid fire succession. As you're either mourning or you're celebrating, the other one's typically showing up at your front door. And, you know, just when you're kind of wanting, you know, and, you know, the world keeps moving, things keep rotating, you've got to get up, you've got to decide not to, you know, the one thing I always think about Walt Disney when I look back at who he was, and I've watched a lot of documentaries lately because I'm in the middle of writing a book right now, that all of the people that I look up to, all of them have, if you could find like one trait, like what do they have, what do they possess, and all of them, it's that idea that normal people would have quit.
Yeah.
You know, normal people would have just packed it in. You know, Jim Henson's that way, right? Like, you know, normal people would have done what he did and people not like it and just said, forget you guys, I'm going to go do something else, you know. But abnormal people say, you know what, I'm going to press through, I'm going to power through.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we often don't recognize greatness until after it's gone. And that's also something that we've kind of put into the Think community, is like, as people achieve and accomplish things, I want to make sure we're celebrating them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've seen that time and time again. You know, you highlighting, hey, here's what's happening with somebody. Here's a win. Let's celebrate with this person. And that also helps because it's not simply just, hey, I'm going through a hard time and I need some help, but it's also, hey, I'm winning in this and I'm celebrating. And it's great to have people who are willing to celebrate with you and aren't trying to tear you down because of a sense of competition over community.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a very strong thing in the room, is the sense of community and going, hey, we're gonna celebrate with you right now and wish you all the best and more success, you know.
Interestingly enough, last week I went to a concert. And before we went to the concert, we went to one of my favorite barbecue places, because it was like, okay, let's pick somewhere we can park in a parking lot and not have to walk to, because we're going downtown. And there's this barbecue place in Nashville called Peg Leg Porker. And it's Kerry Pringle, who's a dude that's kind of internationally known in the barbecue circuit, and he's known for having one leg. And he's got, a fake bottom half of one of his legs. And on his cups, every one of his cups, and my wife started to throw it away. I was like, no, I'm keeping this cup. And it says on the side of them that it's not a requirement for you to hate someone else's barbecue in order to love mine. And man, there's so much we can learn from that. That, just, you don't have to hate. If you love what we're doing, and if you love the stuff that Mike's doing, there's not like this competition.
Yeah. And
I think that I truly believe that, the rising tide rises all ships. And I think that, I think if we started getting around more people that were rising the tide, all of our lives would change. And I'm trying to create spaces and environments. And I'm intentionally also trying to expose you guys. Like when we went to Jamaica, I tried to expose you to things that like, oh, that's different. It's new. It's fresh. It's, and, Mike is a pretty meat and potatoes fellow, so to take him to a place that's known for jerk and spice, it was an exciting adventure for all of us. But it's knowing and encouraging stretching.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for that, if you're part of Mike's community, I'd be super honored if you'd come join us at the thing. It's November. We've been talking about it here, and we haven't told you when it is.
I was going to ask you to
It's
lay some
November 8th,
details on
9th, and 10th. I think, Mike, your code is actually just creative.
Yes.
And that gets you 10% off. If you're interested in coming and like there's something like that's a roadblock for you to get there, like there's something complicated or you need some help or definitely reach out to Mike. And Mike can connect you with me if you're already connected with Mike. Reach out to him, and I will. I'm doing things like helping people who have business partners. Let their business partner come with them, and I'm doing whatever I can because this work and this venture for me is about helping and serving people, and that's not just something that I'm making up or cliche. That's really like. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately there's a limit to how much of that you can do. And some days I feel like I'm closer to that limit than others. But yeah, so just thethingorlando.com is the best place to go. Use the code creative. And we'd love to have you. If you have something else going on, it's worth skipping your fourth cousin's wedding over. Like there's so many things that like I've heard of like reasons why, I can't make this work or this is happening or that's happening. And, find a way to get there because I really truly believe that by you showing up for yourself and sometimes just the act of saying, hey, I'm going to do the work to show up for myself and do the effort to get there that things drastically change.
Yes. Yeah. And I echo the sentiments that I would love to see you in the room. If you've been a listener of the podcast for a while, or you've just started, if you're part of my Daily Creative Habit community or not, if you've been around me at all, and you want to be around me actually physically, you could come and I'll give you a hug. I'll give you a high five. We'll hang out a little bit. Get in the room because it is well worth it. And anything, if you've found any value in anything that I do, so much of that stuff has come out of me being in that room and the relationships that have come from that room and spiderwebbed out of that room. So be a part of that. Trust me, you won't regret it. Any final thoughts, Terry, as we kind of land the plane here?
I was thinking about what you were just saying, and I was thinking, the image that came to mind was like an incubator. We kind of talked about eggs. That it's a place where when you want to hatch eggs, you get warm. You put eggs under light, and you put under things that are shining. And I think that's hopefully what the thing is for people. And I think you've been the benefit of it, and you've also been the light that's warmed other people. You've been the one that's, your talks over the years are people look forward to Mike's talk. They're wondering what antics you're going to come up with, and that's always a great thing to do because we always have some crazy things that we do at the thing. The problem is once you start doing things like showing up with toilet paper, streamers, and bubble makers, and it's like, oh man, how are we gonna up this the next time? And so I think it's worth it for you to get in a place that'll maybe warm you up and incubate what's inside of you that's waiting to hatch, that's waiting to unfurl. That maybe you've just not been in the right environments, and you take an egg and you put it in the right environment, things will change for it. But you put it in a wrong environment, it's just going to go and rot away, and we'll never get to see what it could have been. And I think the difference between becoming something and what could have been is the difference of the places that you put yourself, and the people that you're around, and And Mike's not just saying he'll hang at you; he'll save you a seat at his table. He'll he'll find a way to go to Disney. The event's right at Walt Disney World, right across from Disney Springs. So we're all talking and looking for ways that we can create space and more opportunity just to be available for other people. And we don't have a green room. the speakers aren't hiding backstage because there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
Sorry, introverts. Which more often than not, I find myself defaulting to that phase of like wanting to get away and unplug and like recharge. Because so much of what I do, especially during the weekend of the thing, is give. And I think, and maybe that's you too. Maybe you've just spent a lot of time giving to other people and you want to be somewhere where someone's giving back to you. And so come and let us serve you. Come and let us encourage you. Come and find an incubator of people that are going to help you hatch out what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope that you take Terry and mine, the offer up. And one more time, the link is thethingorlando.com. Use the code CREATIVE and come join us, because being in the room can really change things for you.
And in fact, just because I'm doing this, I'm going to go in and double the discount that people normally get on your code.
Awesome.
So I think I normally get 10%. I'll make it 20%, just because
20% off with the code CREATIVE.
That's just going to be it after this event. I'll change it back, but
awesome.
So
well, thank you,
people
Terry.
there. Try to do everything we can just to take the excuse of like, pick yourself, get there, get around people that care deeply about seeing your creative work not just become something that's in your head, but it's actually in the world.
Absolutely. Well, always a pleasure to hang out with you, and we're going to do some more hanging out in person shortly. But thanks again for being on the podcast, for being the MVP here of the amount of times you've been on the show.
I need a trophy.
I love sharing just what you're doing with my crowd as well. And so we will see you, as you say, at the thing. Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.